In 1865, a celebrated British Army surgeon was being prepared for a post-mortem. After decades of helping others and rising to the second highest medical rank in the British Army, James Barry had died of dysentery. There was nothing strange about the death. Dysentery was a common killer. What was strange were the instructions he left for after his death, that he be buried in the clothes he died in and without examination. The reason for these instructions would soon become clear, as a charwoman, perhaps ignorant of Barry's instructions, began to prepare the body for burial and made a shocking find. By the time James Barry was forcefully retired by the British Army on July 19, 1859, due to ill health and old age, he had accomplished many things in the British Army, including rising to the rank of Inspector General, a position which he used to improve conditions for wounded soldiers as well as the native inhabitants where he was stationed, and performed the first recorded C-section by a European in Africa, in which both the mother and child survived. The only thing is, James Barry was a woman. Upon his death, a charwoman identified the late Barry's body as being perfectly female, and not only that, there were signs consistent with a previous pregnancy via stretch marks on the stomach of the body. So, how is it that he, or she, was able to keep her secret for more than 56 years? And why did they choose to do so? Today on Women in History, we will be looking at the extraordinary life of James Barry, born one Margaret Ann Bulkley. Barry was the second child born to Jeremiah and Mary Ann Bulkley, and was given the name Margaret Ann. Her mother, Mary Ann, was sister to James Barry, a celebrated Irish artist and professor of painting at London's Royal Academy. Due to the large secret she kept hidden and the fact she had no living relatives upon her death, there is some dispute about the early life of James Barry before entering medical school and then entering the British Army. It is believed she could have been born around 1789 in Cork, Ireland, based on Mrs. Bulkley's description of her child being 15 years old in a letter dated January 14, 1805. Margaret Ann's childhood, unfortunately, was not the most pleasant. Her father, Jeremiah Bulkley, ran the Way House in Merchants Quay, Cork. However, anti-Catholic sentiment led to his dismissal from this position. The loss of income and other financial mismanagement soon led to Jeremiah spending time in the Marshalsea debtors' prison in Dublin, leaving his wife and children without support. A third child later appeared in the Bulkley family and was named Juliana. The source of her parentage is somewhat disputed. While presented as Margaret Ann's sister, some believe she may have actually been the source of the stretch marks found on James Barry's body upon his death, meaning she could have been Margaret Ann's daughter from a childhood's assault. Others believe she was the result of infidelity on the part of the mother, Mary Ann Bulkley, due to the fact that Jeremiah kicked out his wife and child during this time, and a later letter discovered written to his wife speaking of forgiving her also led people to believe that Juliana was the result of an affair. Now, there is not enough historical evidence, however, to eliminate either of these theories or confirm them. Around the time Margaret Ann was 15, she and her mother moved to London in 1804 to seek the aid of her uncle, Professor James Barry. He wasn't too keen on getting involved, though, as he had been estranged from his sister, Mary Ann Bulkeley, for over 30 years. They did make the acquaintance of some of his eccentric friends, though, so perhaps there was some mending of the relationship going on. Upon his death in 1806, Professor James Barry left Mary Ann an inheritance, which allowed mother and daughter to live more comfortably and pursue an education for Margaret Ann. The goal seems to have been for her to make money as a tutor, but considering the lack of work history that was found by historians, it doesn't seem she had been successful in this endeavor. Historians believe this was likely the time when the conspiracy to change Margaret Ann to James Barry was developed. A plan seems to have developed between Barry, Mary Ann Bulkeley, and her late brother's influential liberal-minded friends, including General Francisco de Miranda, Edward Fryer, who had become Margaret Ann's personal tutor, and Daniel Reardon, the family solicitor. They enabled Barry to enter medical school, which would not be open to women for another decade. In the early 19th century, Edinburgh was the place to be for anyone wishing to study medicine. The university there was considered the finest medical school in the United Kingdom and one of the best in the world. So the University of Edinburgh was chosen, and they departed on November 30th, 1809 for Margaret Ann, now James Barry, to attend. For all intents and purposes, Margaret Ann had effectively become James Barry and would only answer to that name from then on. In a letter to Daniel Reardon sent on December 14th, Barry asked for any letters addressed to Margaret Bulkeley to be forwarded to Mary Ann Bulkeley, whom Barry now refers to as my aunt, and mentions that it was very useful for Mrs. Bulkeley to have a gentleman to take care of her on board ship and to have one in a strange country. That gentleman being Margaret Ann, who was now going by James Barry. Although the letter was signed James Barry, the solicitor indiscreetly wrote on the back of the envelope, Miss Bulkeley, December 14th, which was a crucial piece of evidence for researchers that confirmed that Margaret Bulkeley and James Barry were one and the same. Arriving in Edinburgh in November 1809, Barry began studies at the medical school as a literary and medical student. Barry's short stature, unbroken voice, delicate features, and smooth skin led many to suspect that Barry was a young boy not past puberty, and the University Senate initially attempted to block Barry's application for the final examinations due to this apparent youth. However, the Earl of Buchan, a friend of Fryer and Barry's late uncle, persuaded the Senate to relent, and Barry qualified as médecin doctor in 1812. After graduating and passing his examinations for the Royal College of Surgeons, he joined the army. His career lasted 50 years and was spent in outposts across the British Empire, from South Africa to the Caribbean to Canada and nearly everywhere in between. Upon joining the army, Barry was commissioned as a hospital assistant in the British Army on July 6, 1813, taking up posts in Chelsea and then the Royal Military Hospital in Plymouth, achieving a promotion to assistant surgeon to the forces, equivalent to lieutenant. Next, he was posted to Cape Town, South Africa in 1816. Thanks to a letter of introduction from Lord Buchan, Barry was introduced to the governor, Lieutenant General Lord Charles Somerset. After Barry successfully treated the governor's daughter of an illness, his career took a meteoric rise. In 1822, Somerset appointed Barry as Colonial Medical Inspector. Barry was promoted to Surgeon to the Forces on November 22, 1827, and posted to Mauritius in 1828. In 1829, Barry risked a great deal of trouble by leaving to return to England without permission in order to treat Lord Charles Somerset, who had fallen ill, and remained there until Lord Charles's death in 1831. In 1836, he was posted to Jamaica, where he infamously got into a fight with a fellow army surgeon and was arrested for conduct unbecoming of the character of an officer and a gentleman, of which he was later honorably acquitted. In 1840, Barry was posted to the Leeward Islands and Windward Islands of the West Indies, there focusing on medicine, management, and improving the conditions of the troops, and receiving a promotion to principal medical officer. In 1845, Barry contracted yellow fever and left for England for sick leave in October. After being cleared for duty, he was posted to Malta in 1846. Here, Barry was severely reprimanded for inexplicably taking a seat in the local church that was reserved for the clergy, and had to deal with the threat and eventual cholera epidemic during 1850. His next posting was to Corfu in 1851, which brought with it a promotion to the rank of Deputy Inspector General of Hospitals on May 16th, equivalent to Lieutenant Colonel. In 1857, Barry was posted to Canada and granted the local rank of Inspector General of Hospitals, again, equivalent to Brigadier General, on September 25th. In that position, Barry fought for better food, sanitation, and proper medical care for prisoners and lepers, as well as soldiers and their families. Although known for love of flamboyant clothes and stylish wigs, Barry's dapper appearance belied a toughness and a hard-nosed, often belligerent dedication to his job. He had a habit of infuriating people in power in his quest to improve sanitation and medical care in the communities he served. As the medical inspector in Cape Town, South Africa, he cracked down on quack medicine hawkers, worked to improve access to clean water for rich and poor alike, and drew up strict rules for the humane treatment of patients at a local leper colony. He also performed one of the first documented cesarean sections in which both mother and infant survived. The child was christened James Barry Munich in Barry's honor, and the name was passed down through the family, leading to Barry's name being borne by a later Prime Minister of South Africa. While stationed in Canada, he demanded that the living conditions and diets for soldiers be improved, and that all ranks have access to recreational facilities and libraries. James Barry had a reputation for shouting, swearing, and insulting those who got in the way of what he saw as necessary reforms, shocking even Florence Nightingale with his brutish nature. As one observer later put it, although it is quite certain that for these interfering ways, many of the senior officers disliked Barry, there must be still many officers and a great many of the ex-rank and file who remember him with gratitude. Despite protesting, Barry was forcibly retired from the army on July 19, 1859, because of ill health and old age, and was succeeded as Inspector General of Hospitals by David Dumbrick. After a quiet retirement in London, Barry died from dysentery on July 25, 1865. Now, Barry had left specific instructions to be followed after his death, which, if they had been followed, would have allowed him, or her, secret to be lost to time. Barry had instructed that no examination of his body be performed, and for him to be buried in the clothes he died in. The death certificate had already been signed by Major D.R. McKinnon, who had issued the death certificate upon which Barry was identified as male. A woman preparing the body, however, without following the late Barry's instructions, went to McKinnon to question why the body was listed as male when it showed clear signs of being female. McKinnon briefly discussed this claim with George Graham of the General Register Office in a letter, but didn't appear particularly concerned. He attested that he had known Inspector General Barry for many years, and to quote, "It was none of my business whether Dr. Barry was a male or a female. That I thought it as likely he might be neither, viz. An imperfectly developed man." He never once inspected the body in detail. Upon not getting paid for her services from McKinnon, the woman who had prepared Barry's body decided to take what she learned to the press, and the rest was history. After the truth was exposed, some people claimed to have known it all along, although many more were shocked and in disbelief. The British Army, seeking to suppress the story, sealed Barry's service records for the next 100 years, and it wasn't revealed until the historian Isabel Ray gained access to the Army records in the 1950s. There is some question on whether Margaret Ann Bulkley chose to assume the identity of James Barry because she simply identified as a male, or because prospects for women in society at the time were limited. I personally believe it was for the latter reason. James Barry was obviously very intelligent, and I can imagine having all of that intelligence and determination limited because of gender was galling, and so she, later he, had rather do something about it. Regardless of her reasoning, I think it's amazing that she, or he, decided not only to pursue her own path, but to excel at the highest level on that path. She could have looked after only herself and her interests to protect her identity, but she sought courses of actions to improve the lives of those she came into contact with and those she was responsible for caring for in her position as a medical officer, which makes him or her more than worthy of spotlight here on Women in History.